There's 23 of you. Okay, we'll wait a few more minutes.
I think we can start and people will jump in.
Okay, sure. Let's go ahead then. Hello from Mexico City. Hi, Samuel.
Hi.
Great.
So I'm turning on the presenter mode.
Okay. All right. Okay. Hello, everyone. Very nice to, I can't say see you because I don't see you. Very nice to see your little icon in the bottom. This is really one of a kind. We see wonderful chats coming from across the world. Cape Town, Mexico City. We have our colleagues from Colombia, Pakistan, Nepal. This is a great time, actually, to do it. I think it catches a lot of time zones. So it's wonderful to gather here in this beautiful, innovative virtual platform. We had a slide up in the last couple of minutes with our agenda for the booth. Hi, Sabine, David, Sean. We've got a really exciting program over the next 20-something hours. And we're starting with a half an hour, kind of an overview of some of our work at UNODC with the private sector. And this opening session will focus more on our educational work with the private sector. And in the course of the next 24 hours, you'll hear more about these education projects around the world with the private sector, as well as other projects we have with the private sector that are not necessarily focusing on education, that are more about legal frameworks and capacities and codes, and you'll hear more about that. Also, we'll give a brief overview now about all the rest of the project. So we have a little flyer here. It's a little hard to see. We'll try to share info on the chat as well. Our first session is this morning, just an overview of our education and business integrity projects, which really synergize and highlight the obligations under Global Compact Principle 10. We'll then move to hear from our colleagues in Kenya about their exciting business integrity project that they'll present and they'll discuss with us, and they'll also show a little surprise video. We'll hear from our colleagues in Mexico in the next session on their work on promoting business integrity in Mexico. After that, our colleagues from Colombia will talk about some of their work bringing together the public and the private sectors to fight corruption. That'll be followed by our colleagues from Washington, D.C., who are based in the World Bank, working on a joint UNODC World Bank project on asset recovery. And this will be followed by our colleagues from Myanmar, talking about some of their work, bringing together government and business to fight corruption in Myanmar, followed by colleagues from Pakistan, again, presenting their work with and for the private sector, followed by a couple of hours where we will put a documentary about our work on a loop. So it's a 22-minute documentary, which will loop around for a couple of hours. You can feel free to ask in the chat any questions you have, and we'll monitor that periodically and answer your questions. The documentary is going to show what we do in the corruption branch of UNODC. Long name is Corruption and Economic Crimes Branch of United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, where I work, as well as my two colleagues here on the screen, Simon and Alex. The three of us are working in the Corruption and Economic Crime Branch and are going to present together with colleagues from around the world in our UNODC's offices around the world over the next 24 hours. Following the screening of this movie tomorrow, we will have a session with our colleagues from the MENA region. Sorry, I just kind of skipped something I'll come back to in a second. So we got our colleagues in the MENA region who are going to present their projects all over the region. And then we wrap up with another sort of overview, overall a short session tomorrow morning on, taking stock of the 15 years of our work at UNODC with the private sector on fighting corruption. And that'll be led by the chief of our section in Vienna, Giovanni Gallo. In the middle of all that, our executive director will deliver a couple of notes during one of the high-level sessions in plenary. And that happens tomorrow, 3 a.m. New York time. Here in Vienna, it's 9 a.m. in the morning, so great time for us. And all this is in our agenda here that you see. We'll try to find a way to send you a PDF of this agenda as well. And so very exciting full day, around the clock, around the sun, following the sun, with UNODC and our anti-corruption projects around the world with and for the private sector. We will start with the current session. It's a short session. Alex is controlling the presentation. We can move to the next slide, which is basically the name of our session, Education, Business Integrity, and Global Compact Principle 10. We can move to the next one. So in a nutshell, the projects we have at UNODC on anti-corruption that have an educational sort of approach, but at the same time are geared to improve business integrity. There are a number of these projects. We'll go through them through the course of the next 20 hours, but we wanted to kind of paint the broader picture, the bigger picture of what we're trying to achieve through these projects. So these anti-corruption education projects with and for the private sector are part of a broader effort of UNODC to fight corruption around the world, not for its own sake, but to promote great goals. And these goals are part of the United Nations Agenda 2030. In particular, I refer to goals 4 in this case, since we're also strengthening education programs, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but primarily SDG 16. And that is the SDG, the Sustainable Development Goal on peace, justice, and strong institutions. That is really crucial, of course, to sustainable development, to fighting corruption, to human flourishing, and the future of the planet. And this work to fight corruption is really the means through which we can ensure that those institutions, those strong institutions that will promote sustainable peace and justice, and all that comes with that, human rights and social cohesion, we need to fight corruption when we build these institutions and when we operationalize these institutions and when we deliver the services and when we come together as society. Because, as we know, corruption is really undermining every single aspect of these institutions and sectors of society. So really at the very outset, we need to think about building strong checks and strong controls so that when we, set the stage for a healthy society with healthy institutions, we already prevent corruption and its disastrous effects. When we talk about in UNODC our work on corruption, we are mainly referring to the UN Convention Against Corruption. This is the normative framework that we draw on, and this is the international treaty that we are the guardians of. In that treaty, there are specific provisions on private sector integrity or fighting corruption within the private sector, as well as on the obligation of states to provide education that aims to prevent corruption, that aims to increase integrity throughout society. And those are Articles 12 and 13 of the UN Convention Against Corruption. So in our work on educational projects with and for the private sector, we are driven by and inspired by and guided by SDG 16, Articles 13 and Articles 12 of UNCAC. And very important point, and that's in the next slide, is that we're very much synergetic with the 10th principle of the Global Compact. And that's in the next slide, coming now. And that principle really is very short, one-liner, and it really asks businesses to work together against corruption. And it says corruption in all its forms, including extortion, bribery. Corruption obviously is more than that. It's abusing power, and that's not only in the public sector. And so embezzlement by business managers of business property is a crime under the UN Convention Against Corruption. So this isn't anymore an issue for governments only. Corruption and anti-corruption enforcement is an issue for the private sector on its own, but it's also an issue where the private sector comes together with civil society and the public sector and the UN to really make an effort to fight this corrosive phenomenon, corruption, which is really an issue everywhere in every single country. It is not an issue of developing countries alone. It is really an issue of all countries, and we must come together. And so Principle 10 really tries to bring in the business community to the commitment. But when we're talking about operationalizing it, when we're talking about actual tools we can apply to make that principle a reality, we can look at UNCAC. And I gave the example earlier of Article 12. That article has a lot of subsections, and it's not just lawyers. Anyone can really read them and see examples for how businesses can promote integrity. They can have a code of conduct, they can have ethical standards, they can have training programs on integrity. There's a lot of different, very simple ways in which businesses can do this, and all of them are provided in the UN Corruption Convention. And by the way, states are obligated to implement those provisions. And so all that gets translated into national laws that in turn gets applied on every single business. So all businesses are obligated under their law. Their law is drawn from the UN Convention Against Corruption, and you can always look at the corruption for more examples, at the Corruption Convention, for more examples. I think we can move to the next slide. This has sort of been our framework. And Simon, my colleague Simon, will take your questions from the chat room. And whenever a couple of questions pile up, just feel free to interrupt me. I know I speak kind of fast. I will try to pause between sentences. So Simon, just jump in there. Let me know those questions, and we'll address them.
Okay. I was just jumping.
Super. Alex, my colleague, will take the floor from me in a couple of slides. And we're trying to finish this presentation in about 15 minutes. And so the first concrete project that I'd like to present to you or discuss with you is quite a new one that we've launched about 7 or 8 months ago. It is funded by the Siemens Integrity Initiative. We had a couple of their representatives here in the booth earlier. I don't know if they're back with us. But it is a very exciting project that looks at exactly that strong linkage between education and the private sector. So a lot of what we're hearing from the private sector is, it's too late to build a mindset of integrity when our employees are already on the job. They have a lot to do, but also it's not really the moment of education for them. So the defining moment, the constructive moment, the formative years of education for skills, that is the university usually, but also lower levels of education, is also the moment in time to build the mindset for ethical behavior, for integrity. And so we've been hearing that around the world, and I don't know how many of you come from the private sector and have these same feelings, but we started thinking together with companies in our network about what we could do to work with them in order to make sure that those university graduates, before they graduated, got the right ethics education. Because remember, there are ethics courses. I myself went through 3 different law schools and received legal ethics courses in every single one of them. But where did I really learn about ethics? I mean, I learned about black letter legal ethics, and a lot of professional ethics are codes. They're black letter codes. The courses don't really work on sharpening your mind around, enabling you to identify a dilemma as an ethical issue and how to analyze it and how to approach it. A lot of those courses are training us to comply with a set of written rules that have already sort of envisaged the scenarios we might confront in terms of ethical dilemma, and don't really leave room for new issues. So what happens when you're on the job and your code of ethics doesn't really regulate this new dilemma you confront? You need to think, right? You need to understand what is what are the values in conflict here, and what are the different approaches to analyzing and confronting it? There is no one approach, by the way. There are many different ethical frameworks that can be used to analyze a dilemma, and you can come to different solutions, but you need to understand what is the process of analyzing these, and to justify also the end result, and to really make that intuitive takes a lot of training. And so companies are working with us now to put all that into university courses, to put concrete ethical dilemma from the workplaces, from the different, we're working with energy sectors, with banking sectors, with insurance, with healthcare. And so they're bringing to us real examples of ethical issues that are not regulated, that are not managed and solved by the different professional ethical codes. And we are building around those cases educational modules for last year university students in departments that are likely to produce cohorts and recruits going to the private sector. We're working on this project in Mexico, Pakistan, and Kenya at the moment. But we do hope that when the good results are out there, and we could prove that our educational intervention at the end of the day helped the businesses in those countries to improve their culture, and not only have one person behave nicely in a sea of, less ethical business people, but actually shift the culture. We want to show that in these 3 countries. And once we do that, we believe there'll be much more inclination around the world to look at our methodologies and apply them across the world. And of course, we'd be happy to help with that. I don't know if there's any questions, Simon, you want to direct my way at, or we wait a bit.
We just got one question that we can maybe talk about. You mentioned these projects are implemented in Kenya, Mexico, and Pakistan. Yeah. Are we also planning on implementing in other countries? Are we working in other countries?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we'd love to do that. We're limited in terms of our capacity, obviously, and our different resources. And so what we decided to do is really to focus on these 3 countries as sort of a pilot stage. And it's really deep work. And so we're going to work for 3 years in these 3 countries very deeply with the educators and the private sector. And we're going to follow the graduates, by the way, into their workplaces. And we're going to measure the attitudinal, behavioral, and cultural changes. Cultural, I mean organizational cultural changes. So we're starting by training the lecturers to teach last year students. And then we're teaching the last year students through these lecturers. And then we're following them in the 3rd year of the project into their jobs to try to see through different measurement methods, by the way. We're using quantitative, qualitative. I mean, Erica, who posed this question, comes from Argentina, where, we had a pre-pilot of this longer pilot to see if we have good tools for measuring ethical behaviors. And I think we've more or less developed quite a good measurement mechanism. And we're using that now in a 3-year project. So at the moment, we're just focusing on those 3 countries. But we are hoping to expand after that, and even during, as much as our resources, human resources and financial resources are allowing. We will, though, share, very importantly, I should mention, we will share along the way the insights from this project with the larger community of our ACAD networks and private sector networks, definitely.
That ties nicely to a question we just got, Sigall, which is if these instructor guides are shared online, if they can be used to teach students. I'm sure you will want to talk about that as well.
Yeah, so all of that's going to be shared. We're already sharing a lot of materials, and we'll come to that in the next few slides. So let's go on with the next few slides of what we are sharing already. And I'll definitely, guarantee that whenever we produce new materials, we'll be sharing those as well. So I think we could switch to the next slide. And here, this slide is just here. I'm happy to share the slides, by the way, afterwards. But it's just a little reminder that this project we just described very briefly, we'll come back to it in a minute, is part of 4 projects that we launched recently with funding from the Siemens Integrity Initiative. And the other 3 projects, they're not focusing necessarily on education. They have a training component, but they're more about bridging the private and public sectors and working on the normative framework, the legal framework of the country, how to improve that framework that relates to the private sector, and how to enhance capacities in the private sector to fight corruption. And we're going to have 3 sessions in the next 20 hours focused on those projects that are happening in Myanmar, Colombia, and in the MENA region. And so stay tuned for those sessions. We can continue now with the next slide. So back to this Global Integrity Education Project. We'll just mention, next slide, we'll just mention very briefly that this, previous slide, that this project has 3 objectives, and I think we skipped a slide. Want to go back to the previous slide? Yeah, previous slide.
This is the previous one.
Okay, sorry. So next one. I think we skipped that one. Exactly, this one. So just so you see the 3 objectives, and I think we'll skip the next, we won't show the next slides, but let's hang on with this one for a sec. Okay, so this slide really talks about the gist of the project, which I explained earlier, but you'll see in the bottom part of it are the specific objectives. So we want to create and implement an innovative contextualized university program, right? And that's what I talked about. But then we also want to follow the graduates into the workplaces and work with them on readapting those university materials to on-the-job trainings. And that's another kind of intervention that we want to test and see how it impacts business and business integrity. And so what the project does through these different various steps is also bridge between academia and the private sector, which again is quite innovative. I think, the next few slides are going into each of these objectives in more detail, and we're going to skip those due to lack of time. Yep, go ahead. Next.
This one?
So we skipped, the breakdown of all our sub-activities under those main components. Happy to go back to that when time allows later. But I really wanted to give the floor to Alex. And before that, just to say that the work on the Global Integrity Education Project, which again will be presented by other colleagues from the Mexico, from the Kenya, and from the Pakistan offices in the next 24 hours. They'll go deep into what they're doing in their countries to implement this. But I just want to mention here that it draws and builds on a lot of our activity on education projects against corruption in the last decade. And these are mainly 2 initiatives, the Education for Justice Initiative and the ACAD initiatives. ACAD is Anti-Corruption Academic Initiative. These 2 initiatives, which we've been rolling out in the last decade and 5 years respectively, are the building blocks of the Siemens-funded Global Integrity Education Project. And they mainly encompass 2 sets of 28 modules in total. So these are flexible modules that university professors can use, and Alex is going to go into detail on corruption and on ethics. And then we have also a training course for lecturers who want to teach the modules. It's an online self-paced course, and it's open source material on our website. And then we also have networks that we developed over the years that are very important resources for us as well. They're the experts and the beneficiaries. And we have also a series of activities, different kinds of workshops that we conduct, train the trainers and conferences. We're moving online with a lot of these. And I'll give the floor now to Alex to go through 1 or 2 more slides just to give you the gist of our educational materials that is available free of charge online. Over to you, Alex. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sigall, and thank you all for joining our session today. So I'll be very brief, and actually what I'm about to say to a large extent will answer the second question raised by the floor. So as Sigall mentioned, the Global Integrity Education Project builds on a lot of our activities under other anti-corruption, integrity, and ethics education initiatives that we've been implementing in the past few years. And the first one that I would like to introduce is called the Education for Justice Initiative. So under this initiative, we are developing different age-appropriate materials aiming to promote rule of law and crime prevention through education. And we also help lecturers to use these materials to teach on different crime prevention and criminal justice and also rule of law related topics in their courses. And this Education for Justice initiative is currently one of the biggest projects of UNODC as a whole, because it covers all UNODC mandate areas. So we develop materials like UNODC, develop materials on all its mandate related areas, including terrorism, organized crime, human trafficking, cybercrime, and also corruption, integrity, and ethics. And also this project covers all levels of education. So as I mentioned, we develop age-appropriate materials for different age group of students, starting from primary through secondary to tertiary level. And me and Sigall particularly are involved in this initiative at tertiary level and focusing on developing anti-corruption, integrity, and ethics materials. And here you see a list of the materials that we develop. So particularly at the tertiary level, we have developed 2 university module series, one on anti-corruption and one on integrity and ethics. And each of these module series consists of 14 modules that lecturers can use to teach on these topics in their classes. Each of these modules is designed as a 3-hour class. So they're very flexible. They're designed to be incorporated in already existing courses. So lecturer can choose 1, 2, or 3, or even more modules and just add them to already existing courses. And here you see the list of the anti-corruption modules, and on this slide is the list of the 14 integrity and ethics modules. So all these modules are very flexible. They're designed for they use simple, non-technical language. They're interdisciplinary, so lecturers from all kinds of disciplines can use them. And they're particularly designed for less experienced lecturers who wish to incorporate anti-corruption or integrity and ethics issues into their non-anti-corruption, non-integrity and ethics courses, so that they'll be able to do that. But also the modules are useful even for more experienced lecturers, as they provide a lot of additional reading materials, teaching tools, exercises, case studies, etc., that could be used by lecturers to update the content of their courses. So this emphasizes the flexibility and the interdisciplinary character of these modules. And by designing these modules, we've been following several principles that we want to emphasize and prepare students for value-driven effective actions. So by designing these modules, we want to encourage the students' critical thinking and also to help them to connect theory to practice. So that not only to teach them what's right and what's wrong, but also how not to do the wrong things and how to take and apply this knowledge to their professional careers. These modules are also interactive and innovative. They're based on very interesting teaching approaches that keeps the student engaged. And they offer a variety of exercises and, as I mentioned, other tools that lecturers can use to make the classes more interesting and to bring them closer to the students' everyday experiences. And in brief, this is the overview of the integrity and ethics modules and the anti-corruption modules. These materials are designed for lecturers, so they are not directly online modules developed for students, but rather for lecturers who wish to teach on these issues in their classes. So if you go to our website, which is available here on this slide, you can find the 14 modules on integrity and ethics, and also the first 7 modules of the anti-corruption series. The next few modules will be published very soon. And since I see that we are running out of time, I will stop here and would like to ask Simon if there are any questions from the floor that we can answer. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alex and Sigall. So we actually don't have any other questions, which is fine. So the colleagues from Kenya can take over, but everyone who's watching, who's listening, please feel free to keep posting your questions. We or other colleagues from all around the world are happy to get back to you and engage with you on your answers.
Thank you.
Okay.
Just because we had a backstage agreement to steal a few minutes from Kenya, David, but hang on with us. We just had a little WhatsApp group going on. So maybe I'll just take the couple minutes Jen gave me to share with everyone. I mean, everyone could see the chat, but a couple of the really interesting questions in the chat, and David, this is also interesting for you guys, was a question about whether we have any evidence or are we studying the correlations between ethical mindsets and competition in business and the whole idea of leveling the playing field and corporate integrity. So we're a little bit new in the business of working on business integrity.
Yeah.
And so what we're trying to do is working in this area while already building this body of evidence. So the project we discussed in the beginning of today, and colleagues from Kenya are going to discuss further on, is a project that, as it is implemented, and it was recently launched, right? But as it is implemented, we're collecting periodically evidence on its impact on the individuals, but also on the organization and their culture in terms of better business, cleaner business, as a result of these different educational interventions. So ask the question again in a couple of years and we'll show you the evidence. And we really liked the questions and we really enjoyed having your participation session. We will thank Alex and Simon for helping with this first kind of opening